talk to a hospital or a nursing home. Senator Braun.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Something I hear so often about back in Indiana would be the unfairness of WEP and GPO, windfall elimination provision and government pension offset. I'm not going to ask a question here, but I want to point out that that seems like an inherent unfairness just due to the nature of your job. And I want to put it in the context that some things need to be fixed, but when you're doing it in the context of now nearly structuralized $2 trillion deficits annually, I think the only budget out there that's been really put there to the public would be Biden's, and I think it takes us from 32 trillion in debt currently up to 52 trillion roughly. Mr. Schwagel, is that correct generally in terms of blueprints for our country?
Yeah, that would be right.
So this is something we probably ought to fix. It's an inherent unfairness to a group of people that serve our country well, school teachers and police officers. But here we're in a mess where we built the system into such a terrible long-term business plan. Senator Johnson has had the most relevant question. You need to start asking, where is enough enough? I think we've grown over the last 2 years of enterprising with the Biden administration to where government in our country is way above the historical average of wherever it's been. I believe that we need it. We need to save Social Security and Medicare. This doesn't seem like a very practical discussion in terms of how do we do it when you're hemorrhaging that much year after year. So when it comes down to, I'm going to ask you, Mr. Schwagel, where do you see the total government expenditures being? We know where the Biden budget wants to take it. If that's what Bidenomics is about, that's a destiny towards a Chapter 11 for the government someday. Are these numbers that ominous in terms of the blueprint out there currently for the biggest business in the world?
We analyze the budget under current law, and the near-term challenge under current law is net interest payments, right? So which are rising sharply from less than $500 billion a year ago, and are set to triple over the next 10 years. So that's kind of the near-term challenge. And then the entitlements, we're talking about Social Security Day, Medicare is just after that. So once you get to the kind of 9-10-year horizon, the entitlements are really the driver of the fiscal challenge.
They're the structural drivers. And then would you say Medicare is more significant in driving that, or Social Security? And which, again, you don't like to talk about policy, just tell me which of the two is growing in the wrong direction most precipitously.
Social Security is closer, but as you look over time and into the sort of far off decades, the increment in Medicare is.
And you know why? Because as little as 30, 35 years ago, that was 5 to 7% of our GDP. Mm-hmm. Now it's approaching 20, and that's another issue. It's the biggest sector of our economy that hides itself behind free enterprise, and there's no transparency. There are barriers to entry. If we wanted to focus on policy that would really make a difference, that'd probably be the thing we could do, but we're still then beset with a business plan that has to start begging the question, how much do you want through government? Am I correct in saying that revenues over a 50-year period have been stubbornly in a narrow bracket?
That's right. The 50-year average of revenues is about 17.4%
Okay.
GDP. So right around there.
Where has it ever gotten out of that stubborn bracket? And that's high tax rates or low tax rates. You have less economic growth, right, when you have higher general tax rates. You have a little better economic growth when your rates are lower. Do you agree with that?
In general, that's what our analysis.
Okay, good. We're getting somewhere. So with everything we've just talked about, we're in a mess because revenues have never budged much beyond that. high rates or low rates. Economic growth generally gets worse the higher the rates are, so you give up something there. Isn't this something that should be as simple as how do we take the money the taxpayers give us and just figure out how to spend less than we take in and acknowledge that the system has never given us more than about 18% of our GDP? Is that a fair statement?
I mean, of course, CBO wouldn't recommend a policy. We would say.
But just look at
one
their
or the
arithmetic.
other. Yeah.
Is that a fair statement?
Arithmetically, it's a fair statement. It's one or the other. It's got to be revenue.
Then I'll go back to what I think besets the whole system, because we all have priorities for within it. Healthcare is actually fixable. I did it in my own business, but you're poking the biggest lobbies back home and here if you do that. At least if they want to call themselves free enterprise, they ought to start acting like it. I think we can accomplish that. But then we're going to have to get down to what works in any other place. You don't have the benefit of the printing press in the basement or a credit card that gets renewed regardless of your bad behavior. You do go to Chapter 11, and you generally end up on the ash heap if you don't correct it in a year or two, meaning Chapter 7. We got to get some political will and backbone around this place. Our future generations, it's shameful that we keep projecting the Bidenomics, the Biden plan, to where we're $52 trillion in debt. Bad business plan, never going to end up well, and it has no relation to fixing programs we want to save. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.